The deep ocean. It is a world of crushing pressure and eternal darkness, a place more hostile to human life than the vacuum of space. Down there, the weight of the water above is immense, a force that can crumple steel like a tin can. It's a realm where sunlight never reaches, where the only light comes from the strange bioluminescent creatures that call this abyss home. For centuries, this deep, dark world has remained one of Earth's last great mysteries, a final frontier right here on our own planet. It is a place of profound danger, but also of profound curiosity. What secrets lie hidden in the crushing blackness, miles below the waves we know so well, and yet despite the colossal dangers we are drawn to it. Humanity has always possessed an insatiable urge to explore, to push the boundaries of what is known and what is possible. We conquered the highest mountains. We walked on the moon. It was only a matter of time before we turned our sights downwards, to the deepest, most inaccessible parts of our own world. This drive is not just about scientific discovery, it's about adventure. It's about the thrill of going where few have gone before, of seeing things that have remained unseen by human eyes for millennia. The abyss calls to the brave, the reckless, and the rich. This desire to explore the deep is not a new phenomenon. For decades, scientists and engineers have been developing incredible machines to withstand the phenomenal pressures of the abyss. Submersibles, these remarkable feats of engineering, are our only ticket to this alien world. They are our life support, our shield against the immense forces that would instantly obliterate an unprotected human. These vessels are the culmination of years of research, built with exotic materials and packed with advanced technology. They are the chariots that carry a select few into a kingdom of perpetual night, allowing them to witness wonders that most of us can only dream of. But with great exploration comes great risk. Every single dive into the deep is a gamble. A tiny flaw in the hull, a malfunction in the electronics, a single miscalculation. Any of these can lead to catastrophic failure. The line between a groundbreaking expedition and a devastating tragedy is incredibly thin. The ocean does not forgive mistakes. It is a powerful and unforgiving master. This is a fundamental truth that every deep-sea explorer understands, a risk they willingly accept for a chance to glimpse the mysteries hidden in the depths, a truth that would be brought into sharp, tragic focus in the summer of 2023. There is one wreck, above all others, that captures the imagination, the Titanic. It wasn't just a ship, it was a symbol of an era, a monument to human ambition, luxury, and ultimately hubris. When it set sail in 1912, it was the largest moving object ever built by man, hailed as unsinkable. It represented the pinnacle of industrial age technology and opulence. On board were some of the wealthiest people in the world, alongside hundreds of immigrants hoping for a new life in America. The story is etched into our collective memory, the glamour, the iceberg, the tragic loss of over 1,500 souls in the freezing North Atlantic. The sinking of the Titanic was a profound shock to the world. It was a brutal lesson that nature's power could humble even the proudest of human achievements. For 73 years, the great ship lay lost in the abyss, its exact location a mystery. Its discovery in 1985 by a team led by Dr. Robert Ballard was a monumental event. Suddenly, the ghost ship was real. The first images that came back from the deep were haunting. They showed a decaying giant resting peacefully on the seabed, a silent, ghostly tombstone 2.5 miles beneath the surface. The world was captivated once more by the story of the Titanic. Seeing the wreck became the ultimate pilgrimage for a new kind of explorer. It's more than just a pile of rusting metal on the ocean floor. It is a preserved moment in time, a sacred underwater memorial. To visit the Titanic is to come face to face with history in its rawest form. You can see the grand staircase where a generation of society's elite once walked, now an empty void. You can see personal effects scattered across the debris field, a pair of shoes, a piece of luggage, each telling a silent, heartbreaking story. It is a deeply emotional and powerful experience, a direct connection to one of the most famous disasters in history. This powerful allure has created a unique and exclusive form of tourism. Visiting the Titanic is not like a trip to the Eiffel Tower. It is an expedition that costs a fortune and is fraught with immense technical challenges and dangers. Only a handful of people in the entire world have ever made the journey to see the wreck with their own eyes. It is the Mount Everest of underwater exploration, attracting wealthy adventurers and Titanic enthusiasts who are willing to pay vast sums of money for a chance to join this elite club. This growing interest set the stage for a new company with a new kind of submersible, promising to make the dream a reality for more people. Into this world of high stakes, deep-sea tourism came a company called OceanGate. Founded in 2009 by Stockton Rush, it had a bold and ambitious vision. Rush wasn't a traditionalist in the world of submersible engineering. He saw the existing methods as too slow, too expensive, and too cautious. He believed that innovation, particularly the use of new materials like carbon fiber, could revolutionize deep-sea exploration. His goal was to open up the deep ocean, making it more accessible not just for scientists, but for private citizens, or mission specialists, as he called them. He wanted to do for the abyss what others had done for space. The centerpiece of this vision was a unique submersible named Titan. It was unlike any other deep-sea vehicle. While most subs are built as perfect spheres made of solid titanium to withstand the uniform pressure, Titan had a different design. It featured a cylindrical hull made primarily of filament-wound carbon fiber, capped at each end with titanium domes. This was a radical departure from established engineering norms. The use of carbon fiber was intended to make the vessel much lighter and more cost-effective to build and operate. It was, in Rush's view, the future of deep-sea exploration, a triumph of innovation over old-fashioned convention. This innovative approach, however, raised eyebrows among many experts in the small, tight-knit, deep-sea engineering community. They warned that the design was unproven for the depths it was intended to reach. Carbon fiber is an incredibly strong material, but its behavior under the immense cyclical pressures of repeated deep dives was not well understood. Critics worried that the material could fail suddenly and catastrophically without any warning. Concerns were raised about the experimental nature of the craft and the decision to forego certification from industry-standard maritime classification societies. OceanGate, however, argued that regulation stifled innovation. Despite these concerns, the allure of the Titanic was powerful, and OceanGate found willing customers. For a price tag of $250,000 per person, adventurers could book a seat on a multi-day expedition to the famous wreck. The mission planned for June 2023 was set to be another of these exclusive journeys. A crew of 5, including Stockton Rush himself, a renowned Titanic expert, a British billionaire adventurer, and a prominent Pakistani businessman with his son, prepared to make the descent. They gathered in St. John's, Newfoundland, filled with anticipation, ready to embark on an adventure that few could ever imagine. The world was, at that point, completely unaware that this mission would soon become a global headline for all the wrong reasons. On board the Titan for this fateful mission was a diverse group of 5 individuals, each drawn to the deep for their own reasons. Leading the expedition was Stockton Rush, the CEO of OceanGate himself. Rush was not just the man in charge, he was the visionary, the pilot, and a true believer in his creation. He saw himself as a pioneer, pushing back against a slow-moving and overly cautious industry. He was there to prove that his innovative approach to deep-sea exploration was not just viable, but superior. For Rush, this dive was another step in his grand plan to open up the last frontier on Earth. He was betting his life and the lives of his passengers on his own engineering philosophy. Alongside him was Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a man affectionately known as Mr. Titanic. A former French naval commander, Nargeolet was one of the world's foremost experts on the famous wreck. He had visited the site more than 30 times, spending thousands of hours in the deep. He knew the debris field better than anyone alive. His presence on the mission lent it a significant degree of credibility. For him, each dive was a chance to uncover new secrets from the ship's grave, to piece together more of its story. He was a seasoned veteran of the abyss, a steady hand who understood its perils intimately yet was always compelled to return. The mission had also attracted Hamish Harding, a British billionaire and seasoned adventurer. Harding was a man who lived for exploration and held 3 Guinness World Records, including the longest duration at full ocean depth. He had journeyed to the South Pole multiple times and even flown to the edge of space. For a man like Harding, the chance to visit the Titanic was the next logical step in a life dedicated to pushing boundaries. It was another ultimate challenge, another exclusive club to join. He was there for the thrill, the history, and the sheer adventure of descending to a place so few would ever see. Rounding out the crew were Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son, Suleiman. Shahzada was a prominent Pakistani-British businessman from a wealthy industrialist family, with a keen interest in science and discovery. His son, Suleiman, was a university student, a young man just beginning his life, who shared his father's fascination with the Titanic legend. For them, this was not just an adventure, it was a unique father-son bonding experience, a chance to share in a once-in-a-lifetime journey. They were there to create a memory that would last forever, united by a shared passion for exploration and history, completely unaware of the tragedy that lay ahead. The Titan submersible was the star of the show and, well, the source of all the controversy. It was Stockton Rush's pride and joy. Unlike virtually every other deep-sea submersible, which are painstakingly built from solid, thick titanium spheres, Titan was a hybrid. Its main passenger compartment was a 5-inch thick cylinder of filament-wound carbon fiber. This material, common in aerospace and Formula One, was chosen because it's incredibly light and strong for its weight. Rush believed this was the key to making deep-sea travel cheaper. The cylinder was capped at either end by 2 domes made of titanium, the more traditional material for this kind of work. It was a radical design, a complete departure from the tried and tested rulebook. Inside, the Titan was surprisingly basic. It was a simple tube about the size of a minivan with no seats. The 5 occupants had to sit cross-legged on the floor. There was a single small porthole at the front for viewing, which was also the craft's main viewport. The controls were even more surprising. The submersible was piloted using a modified video game controller, a testament to Rush's philosophy of using simple, off-the-shelf components wherever possible to keep costs down. It was a stark contrast to the complex control panels you might see in a NASA spacecraft or a Navy submarine. To some, this was ingenious simplicity. To others, it was dangerously reckless. This philosophy of innovation over regulation was central to OceanGate's identity. The company had made a conscious decision not to have the Titan certified or classed by any independent maritime safety agency like Lloyd's Register or the American Bureau of Shipping. Rush argued that the certification process was too slow and would stifle the very innovation he was trying to champion. He claimed that the focus on safety was paramount within OceanGate itself and that external validation was unnecessary. This was a massive gamble. It meant that the vessel's safety and structural integrity were vouched for only by the company that built it and stood to profit from it. The concerns from the wider deep-sea community were not just whispers. They were loud and clear. Multiple experts had warned Rush directly about the experimental nature of his carbon fiber hull. They worried that, unlike metal, which bends and deforms under stress, giving some warning of impending failure, carbon fiber could simply shatter. The cyclical stress of repeated dives to extreme depths could create tiny, invisible delaminations in the material. These weaknesses could grow with each trip until the hull failed catastrophically and instantly. The warnings were clear. This was a vessel operating far outside the established safety norms of the industry. The journey to the Titanic does not begin with an immediate dive. The wreck lies in a remote part of the North Atlantic, about 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. To get there, the Titan and its crew first had to travel aboard a larger mothership. For this mission, that ship was the MV Polar Prince, a former Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker. This rugged 300-foot vessel was chartered to serve as the expedition's surface support platform. It was equipped with the necessary launch and recovery system for the Titan, and served as the command center for the entire operation. It was from the deck of the Polar Prince that the mission would be coordinated. The expedition set off from St. John's, Newfoundland on Friday, June 16, 2023. The mood aboard the Polar Prince was one of excitement and anticipation. The crew and the mission specialists were finally on their way. The journey to the dive site itself would take about 2 days, crossing a stretch of ocean known for its harsh and unpredictable weather. During this time, the team would conduct final systems checks on the Titan, go over the dive plan, and receive safety briefings. It was a period of preparation, a chance for the team to acclimatize and build camaraderie before the main event, the descent into the abyss. This was not just a tourist trip, it was framed as a scientific mission. The paying customers were designated as mission specialists and were expected to assist with tasks like communications and sonar operation. This was part of OceanGate's model, to make the clients feel like active participants in a real expedition, not just passive passengers. It added to the sense of adventure and importance. The primary goal was, of course, to see the wreck of the Titanic, but the mission also had objectives to collect data and imagery of the decaying ship, contributing to the ongoing study of its deterioration. By Saturday, June 17th, the Polar Prince had arrived at the designated coordinates, directly above the final resting place of the Titanic. They were now floating 2.5 miles above history. Below them, in the crushing dark, lay the legendary liner. Weather conditions on the surface were reportedly deteriorating, but a window of opportunity was forecast for the following day. The team made the decision to proceed with the dive as planned for Sunday morning. The Titan was readied on its launch platform, its systems powered up, and its hull sealed for the journey into the deep. Every element was in place for the adventure to begin. The morning of Sunday, June 18th, 2023 arrived. This was the day. The 5 men, Stockton Rush, Paul-Henri Narjolet, Hamish Harding, Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman, boarded the Titan. The interior was cramped, a small white tube with minimal amenities. Once inside, the hatch was sealed from the outside. There was no way for them to open it from within. They were now completely reliant on the surface crew to be let out upon their return. The 17 bolts securing the hatch were tightened one by one, locking the crew into their capsule for the next 8 to 10 hours. It was a point of no return. Before the Titan was released from its launch platform, a series of pre-dive checks were conducted. Communications were established with the command center on the Polar Prince. Life support systems, which provided oxygen and scrubbed carbon dioxide from the air, were verified. The internal pressure was checked and all electronic systems were given a final once-over. From the small porthole, the crew would have seen the grey, choppy waters of the North Atlantic. They were a small, fragile bubble of life about to be dropped into one of the most hostile environments on the planet. The sense of anticipation must have been immense. The dive plan was straightforward. The descent to the seafloor, 12,500 feet below, was expected to take about 2.5 hours. During this time, the Titan was required to send a ping back to the Polar Prince every 15 minutes, confirming its position and that all systems were nominal. This constant communication was their only lifeline to the surface world. Once at the bottom, they would spend several hours exploring the wreck of the Titanic, gliding over the bow section and the vast debris field. Then, another 2.5-hour ascent would bring them back to the surface, where the launch platform would retrieve them. At approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, local time, the dive commenced. The launch platform was submerged, and the Titan was released to begin its solo journey downwards. It slipped beneath the waves, its lights cutting a brief swathe through the murky surface waters before disappearing entirely. It was now descending through the water column, into ever-increasing darkness and pressure. For the first hour, everything appeared to be going exactly as planned. The pings were coming in every 15 minutes, a steady, reassuring heartbeat from the deep. On the Polar Prince, the support crew watched their monitors, tracking the submersible's slow, steady plunge towards history. The descent began. At 8 o'clock on that Sunday morning, the Titan was released from its cradle and began to fall silently towards the seabed. For the 5 men inside, this was the moment it all became real. The familiar world of waves and wind on the surface vanished, replaced by a descending cocoon of blue, which would quickly fade to black. The only light would soon be the faint glow of the instrument panels and the powerful external beams cutting through the gloom. The pressure outside the hull started to build almost immediately, a silent, invisible force squeezing the vessel from all sides. Every foot of descent added more and more weight from the column of water above. Inside the cramped tube, the mood was likely one of concentrated excitement. Stockton Rush would have been at the controls, his modified video game controller in hand, guiding the submersible on its trajectory. Paul-Henri Narjolet, the veteran, would have been calm, perhaps sharing stories of his previous dives, his eyes scanning for the first familiar signs of the deep. Hamish Harding, Shahzada and Suleiman Dawood would have been peering through the single porthole, a tiny window into an alien world, waiting for the abyss to reveal its secrets. They were falling through the ocean's layers, a journey through liquid space, leaving the sunlit world far, far behind them. For the first hour, everything was going according to plan. The communications log on the Polar Prince recorded the steady pings from the Titan, sent every 15 minutes like clockwork. These signals were the submersible's heartbeat, a simple message confirming that it was still functioning, still alive. The support crew on the mothership would have been tracking its progress, their faces lit by the glow of monitors displaying depth and position. On paper, it was a perfect descent. The Titan was performing exactly as it was designed to, sinking gracefully towards its legendary destination at a controlled speed. The mission was on track. But the environment they were descending into is relentlessly hostile. As the Titan passed the 3,000-foot mark, it entered the midnight zone, a realm where no sunlight ever penetrates. The pressure here is already immense, over 100 times that at the surface, and it just keeps increasing. For every 33 feet of descent, another atmosphere of pressure is added. By the time it reached the depth of the Titanic, the vessel would be subjected to a force of nearly 6,000 pounds per square inch on every part of its surface. This is a force capable of crushing a military submarine. The Titan was plunging deeper and deeper into this zone of unimaginable pressure. As the first hour of the dive passed, the Titan continued its journey into the crushing blackness. The communications between the submersible and the Polar Prince remained stable. It was a simple text-based system, a series of short messages and pings relayed through the water. This acoustic link, known as a USBL system, was their only connection to the surface. It was not a crystal-clear audio or video feed. It was more like a slow, deliberate exchange of telegrams with the deep. The messages confirmed the vessel's depth, its rate of descent, and that all systems were, as they say in the business, nominal. Everything was fine. Then, things started to become less fine. While the public would not learn the details for many months, later reports from the investigation revealed that the descent was not as smooth as initially believed. Stockton Rush, piloting the craft, reportedly messaged the surface that he was having issues with the ballast system. The ballast system is crucial for controlling a submersible's descent and ascent. It involves taking on water to become heavier and sink, and then dropping solid weights to become buoyant and rise. A problem with this system is not a minor inconvenience. It's a fundamental issue with the vehicle's ability to control its own movement in the vertical water column. Despite these emerging problems, the decision was made to press on. The crew on the surface advised Rush to continue descending, perhaps believing the issue could be managed or was a known quirk of the experimental vessel. This is a critical moment in the timeline. It represents a point where the mission could have been aborted. The submersible could have dropped its weights and begun a slow ascent back to the safety of the surface. Instead, the choice was made to continue deeper, pushing the machine further into the high-pressure environment, a decision that would have monumental consequences for everyone on board. The regular 15-minute pings continued for a while, a reassuring pulse that masked the growing technical difficulties. To the world above, the Titan was still on its way, still functioning. But inside that carbon fiber tube, the situation may have been growing more tense. The men were not just passengers, they were mission specialists, aware of the procedures and likely aware of the communications with the surface. They were 2.5 miles from safety in a machine that was reportedly not behaving as it should, with the pressure outside building with every passing second. The adventure was slowly, imperceptibly turning into a crisis. The clock ticked past 9:45 in the morning. The Titan had now been descending for 1 hour and 45 minutes. It would have been approaching its target depth, nearing the seabed where the Titanic lay. Down here, the absolute darkness is total and the water is just a few degrees above freezing. The pressure on the hull would have been astronomical, the equivalent of having dozens of jumbo jets stacked on top of it. This was the moment of maximum stress, the point where the innovative but unproven carbon fiber hull was being tested to its absolute limit, far beyond what most materials could ever endure. This was when the final message was received. At 9:45, a ping arrived at the Polar Prince as scheduled. It was the last one. After that message, the steady 15-minute heartbeat that had connected the Titan to the world simply stopped. The next scheduled communication, due at 10 o'clock, never came. On the bridge of the mothership, the initial silence might not have caused immediate panic. Communication links in the deep ocean can be notoriously unreliable. A temporary loss of signal is not unheard of. The crew on the surface would have waited, watched their screens, and hoped for the familiar ping to reappear. But as the minutes stretched on, hope would have begun to curdle into worry. 15 minutes became 30. 30 minutes became an hour. Every passing moment of silence from the deep made the situation more grave. The support team would have been trying everything, sending repeated signals to the Titan, listening intently for any response, any sign of life. But there was nothing, just an unnerving, profound silence from the abyss below. The submersible, with 5 people inside, had vanished from their screens and from their sensors. It was as if it had simply ceased to exist. The dive plan had a built-in deadline. The Titan was scheduled to resurface at 4:30 that afternoon, 8.5 hours after it began its descent. Even if communications were lost, the submersible was designed with safety features that should have allowed it to return to the surface on its own after a certain amount of time. As the afternoon wore on and the 4:30 deadline approached with no sign of the Titan, the worry on the Polar Prince would have escalated into a full-blown emergency. The small white submersible had not returned. It was lost somewhere in the vast, dark expanse of the North Atlantic. As the designated return time came and went, the stark reality began to set in for the crew of the Polar Prince. The Titan was not coming back. At 5:40 in the evening, nearly 9 hours after the last communication, the official alarm was raised. The surface crew made the call they had been dreading, notifying the United States Coast Guard that they had a submersible overdue and uncontactable. This single phone call triggered a massive international response. The quiet, private expedition to the Titanic was about to become a global news story. A race against time played out on the world stage. The immediate problem for rescuers was the sheer scale of the unknown. They didn't know where the Titan was. Had it suffered a power failure and was now sitting silently on the seabed? Was it adrift somewhere on the vast surface of the ocean, bobbing helplessly in the waves? Or had something far worse happened? The search area was enormous, covering thousands of square miles of open ocean, with a depth of 2.5 miles. It's like trying to find a shoebox in an area twice the size of a large city, at the bottom of a pitch-black canyon. The challenge was immense. Hope, at this early stage, centered on one critical factor, the oxygen supply. The Titan had a life support system rated for 96 hours for 5 people. The clock was now ticking. From the moment the alarm was raised, a desperate countdown began. If the crew were alive, trapped inside the submersible, they had a finite amount of breathable air. This 96-hour window became the focal point for the media and the public. It created a powerful dramatic narrative of survival, a ticking clock that infused the search with a desperate sense of urgency. The world held its breath, hoping for a miracle, but experts in the deep-sea community harbored a darker fear. They knew the immense pressures involved and the experimental nature of the Titan's hull. While the world focused on the 96-hour oxygen supply, many insiders feared that the countdown was irrelevant. They suspected that the loss of communication at 1 hour and 45 minutes was not a simple technical glitch. They believed it signaled a catastrophic failure, an instantaneous event from which there could be no survivors. The silence from the deep was not the sound of a vessel waiting to be rescued, it was the sound of a tomb. The call went out, and the world responded. The United States Coast Guard immediately took the lead, launching a massive search and rescue operation from Boston. They were soon joined by their Canadian counterparts, who dispatched aircraft and ships to the remote patch of ocean where the Titan had disappeared. This was not a simple task. The search area was immense, a sprawling expanse of unforgiving sea, roughly twice the size of the state of Connecticut. The first wave of the response focused on the surface. Military aircraft, including powerful P-8 Poseidon and C-130 Hercules planes, began flying grid patterns over the water, their crews scanning the waves for any sign of the missing submersible. It was a mission of staggering complexity. The search effort was split into two distinct challenges, a surface search and a subsurface search. The surface search was a hunt for a needle in a haystack, hoping the Titan had managed to ascend and was now bobbing like a cork in the vastness of the Atlantic. The subsurface search was astronomically more difficult. It required specialized equipment capable of scanning the seabed 2.5 miles down. The initial assets on scene were simply not equipped for this. They could look, but they couldn't reach the depths where the Titanic lay, the most likely location of the stranded vessel. Help began to pour in from across the globe. The French government dispatched the research vessel l'Atalante, which carried a crucial piece of equipment, the Victor 6000, a remotely operated vehicle capable of diving to the required depth. Commercial companies with deep water expertise also mobilized their resources, sending cable-laying ships and other support vessels steaming towards the site. It was an unprecedented international coalition of military, government and private assets, all converging on one spot in the North Atlantic. The mission had a single, desperate goal: find the Titan before its air ran out. This armada of ships and planes represented the very best of humanity's maritime search and rescue capabilities. It was a powerful display of international cooperation in the face of a crisis. But even with all this technology, the ocean held the upper hand. The weather was turning, with fog and high seas complicating the aerial search, and the sheer depth of the subsurface search area remained a monumental obstacle. The world had assembled its best tools for the job, but everyone knew they were fighting against the clock, the elements, and the crushing, silent physics of the deep ocean. As the search planes flew, their sorties and ships converged on the location, one number dominated every news report and conversation: 96 hours. This was the estimated duration of the Titan's emergency oxygen supply. From the moment it was sealed on Sunday morning, a countdown had begun. By Monday, a full day had passed. By Tuesday, they were halfway through the breathable air, assuming the crew was still alive and the hull was intact. This ticking clock created an incredibly powerful and simple narrative that gripped the world. It wasn't an abstract technical problem. It was a human drama of survival against a deadline. The families of the 5 men on board were thrust into an unimaginable agony of waiting. They were caught between hope and despair, clinging to any shred of positive news while fearing the worst. They received briefings from the Coast Guard and OceanGate, but information was scarce. The world watched them, their private torment becoming a public spectacle. For Shazad Dawood's wife and Hamish Harding's family, every passing hour without news was another turn of the screw. They were living every family's worst nightmare, waiting for a phone call that could bring either miraculous relief or devastating confirmation of their loss. The 96-hour time frame became a focal point for the entire operation, dictating the pace and urgency of the search. Every decision was made with this deadline in mind. Could they get the deep-sea ROVs to the site in time? Could they locate the submersible before the oxygen levels became critical? If they found it on the seabed, how could they possibly rescue the crew? The logistical challenges were immense. A rescue at that depth had never been attempted before. It would require finding the Titan, attaching a recovery line, and slowly winching a 9-ton vessel up from 12,500 feet, all before the air ran out. This focus on the oxygen supply, however, created a narrative that many deep-sea experts found misleading. While the world was counting down the hours, these specialists were quietly pointing to a much grimmer possibility. They knew that a catastrophic implosion due to hull failure would have been instantaneous. In their view, the 96-hour clock was likely irrelevant. The fate of the Titan and its crew was probably sealed at 9:45 on Sunday morning. The race against time that captivated the public was, in all likelihood, a race that had been lost before it had even begun. On Tuesday, June 20th, with the countdown timer ticking below the 40-hour mark, a dramatic development electrified the search. A Canadian P-3 Orion aircraft, equipped with sophisticated sonar buoys, dropped into the ocean, detected something. The sonar operators picked up distinct, regularly spaced sounds from the deep. They were described as banging noises occurring at 30-minute intervals. This was a potential breakthrough. A rhythmic metallic banging is not a sound that occurs naturally in the ocean. It was a possible sign of life, a sign that the crew were alive and trying to signal their presence by striking the hull of the submersible. The news of the banging sound spread like wildfire across the globe. It was the first glimmer of genuine hope since the Titan had vanished. The narrative shifted instantly. This was no longer just a search for a missing vessel. It was a potential rescue of 5 conscious men trapped in the dark. The search assets were immediately redirected to the area where the sounds had been detected. The focus of the entire multinational operation narrowed to this one specific zone. The world held its breath, believing that this could be the moment that turned the tide. The crew were fighting back. This development injected a huge dose of optimism into the media coverage and the public consciousness. News anchors reported the story with renewed urgency. Social media was flooded with messages of hope and prayers. The story now had a new, powerful element, the image of the men inside the Titan, cold and in darkness, methodically banging on the hull to guide rescuers to their location. It was a testament to human resilience and the will to survive against impossible odds. For the families, this news must have been a moment of intense, almost unbearable hope, a reason to believe in a miracle. However, behind the scenes, there was considerable skepticism among acoustic experts. The ocean is a noisy place, and identifying the source of a specific sound is incredibly difficult. The sounds could have been from marine life, from other ships in the search area, or even from the wreckage of the Titanic itself shifting on the seabed. While the Coast Guard officially acknowledged the sounds and redirected the search, they were careful to manage expectations. The banging was a lead, a very important one, but it was far from definitive proof. The desperate hope it generated was balanced by the cold, hard reality of acoustic science. From the moment the United States Coast Guard confirmed the search, the Titan story became a global media obsession. News channels around the world provided 24-hour non-stop coverage. Journalists descended on St. John's in Newfoundland and Boston, the 2 hubs of the operation. Every press conference held by the Coast Guard was broadcast live, with every word from the officials scrutinized for new details or hints of progress. The faces of the 5 men on board were shown on screen constantly, their personal stories and backgrounds repeated, transforming them from anonymous adventurers into household names at the center of a global drama. The story had all the elements of a Hollywood blockbuster, which fueled the intense public interest. It involved a famous shipwreck, billionaire adventurers, a futuristic and controversial submersible, and a desperate race against time. The public was captivated. People who had never given a thought to deep-sea exploration were suddenly experts on remotely operated vehicles, carbon fiber hulls, and the crushing pressures of the abyss. Social media platforms were ablaze with discussion, theories, prayers, and amateur analysis. The search for the Titan was not just a news story. It had become a shared global event, watched in real time by millions. This intense media spotlight had both positive and negative effects. On the one hand, it helped to galvanize the international response, putting pressure on governments and companies to contribute assets to the search. The public visibility ensured that no expense was spared. On the other hand, it also created a platform for a huge amount of speculation and misinformation. Experts, pseudo-experts, and outright cranks were all given airtime to voice their opinions. The focus on the 96-hour oxygen countdown, while dramatically compelling, may have given false hope and overshadowed the more likely and much grimmer technical realities of the situation. For the families of the crew, this media frenzy was a double-edged sword. The outpouring of public support was undoubtedly a comfort, a sign that the world cared about their loved ones. But the constant speculation, the endless news cycles, and the cameras camped outside their homes must have been an unbearable intrusion into their private grief and anxiety. They were forced to navigate the most terrifying days of their lives under the full glare of the world's attention, their personal tragedy playing out as a piece of public entertainment. It was a heavy price to pay for the world's fascination. Thursday morning, June 22nd, arrived. This was the day. According to the official estimates, the 96-hour oxygen supply was expected to run out sometime in the morning. The sense of urgency reached its absolute peak. The French vessel l'Atalante had finally arrived on site overnight, and its powerful remotely operated vehicle, the Victor 6000, was being prepared for deployment. Another remotely operated vehicle from the Canadian vessel Horizon Arctic was already on the seabed, beginning its search in the area where the banging noises had been heard. These were the most capable assets yet, our best and last chance to find the Titan intact. As the world watched, the final hours of the supposed oxygen window ticked away. The narrative was now one of extreme desperation. News reports counted down the minutes, with correspondents speaking in hushed, somber tones. The question was no longer just, can they find it? But can they find it in time? Even if a remotely operated vehicle located the Titan on the seafloor, the challenge of rescue seemed insurmountable in such a short time frame. The hope that had been sparked by the banging sounds was now fading, replaced by a grim acceptance that the window for a miracle was closing fast. The focus of the search was the seabed around the Titanic wreck itself. The remotely operated vehicle from the Horizon Arctic began its methodical search, its powerful lights cutting through the eternal darkness of the abyss. Its high-definition cameras sent a live feed back to the surface, a stream of images from a world 2.5 miles down. The crew on the Horizon Arctic, and indeed the entire world, waited for that one image, the sight of the white cylindrical hull of the Titan sitting silently on the ocean floor. It was the image everyone was praying for, the first step in a rescue that seemed almost impossible. But that is not the image they found. Instead, just before midday, as the last minutes of the 96-hour window expired, the remotely operated vehicle discovered something else. It wasn't the intact hull of the submersible. It was a debris field. The vehicle's camera identified several distinct pieces of wreckage. Among them were the Titan's landing frame and, most tellingly, its rear cover. There was no longer any ambiguity. There was no need to worry about the oxygen supply. The search and rescue mission was over. The debris confirmed the experts' worst fears. The Titan had suffered a catastrophic implosion. The race against time had ended days before it ever truly began. The discovery of the debris field was the end of all hope. The search for survivors was over. Now, a new search began. A search for answers. The key pieces of wreckage, the titanium nose cone, the tail cone, and parts of the landing frame, were found scattered on the seabed, not far from the bow of the Titanic. The central part of the vessel, the carbon fiber passenger hull, was gone. It had disintegrated. This evidence pointed to only one possible conclusion, the one that experts had feared from the very beginning: a catastrophic implosion. It was not a slow leak or a power failure. It was an instantaneous, violent end. An implosion is the opposite of an explosion. Instead of a force bursting outwards, it is a force collapsing inwards. At the depth of the Titanic, the pressure is nearly 400 times that at the surface. That's almost 6,000 pounds of force on every single square inch of the submersible's hull. If that hull fails, even with a tiny flaw, the result is immediate and total. The immense weight of the water above instantly crushes the vessel. The event happens in milliseconds, faster than the human brain can even register pain or fear. The air inside the hull would have auto-ignited from the rapid compression, creating a flash of heat hotter than the surface of the sun for a fraction of a second. This was the fate of the Titan and the 5 men inside. One moment they were descending towards history. The next, they were gone. The implosion would have been so fast and so complete that the submersible was destroyed before any of the onboard safety systems could even deploy. The emergency ascent weights, the alarms, the communications, none of it mattered. The hull had simply failed under the colossal, unforgiving pressure of the deep ocean. The silence that began at 9:45 on Sunday morning was not a communications fault. It was the precise moment that the Titan ceased to exist. The location of the debris field provided the final grim confirmation. It was found at a depth of roughly 12,500 feet, right above the Titanic wreck. This suggests the failure happened as the Titan neared the end of its descent, at the point of maximum pressure and maximum stress on the hull. The search for rhythmic banging noises, the race against the 96-hour oxygen clock, it had all been a ghost hunt. A tragic, hopeful drama played out for a world that did not yet know the 5 men were already lost. The real mystery was not where the Titan was, but why its revolutionary hull had failed so spectacularly. The investigation immediately zeroed in on the most controversial part of the Titan's design, its carbon fiber hull. This was Stockton Rush's big innovation, his gamble. While titanium is a uniform, predictable material that has been trusted for decades in the deep sea, carbon fiber composite is different. It is made of countless layers of carbon fabric bonded together with resin. This makes it incredibly strong and light, but it also introduces complexity. The strength of the final product depends entirely on the perfection of its construction. Any tiny voids, defects, or delaminations between the layers could create a fatal weak spot. Experts believe the cause of the failure was likely material fatigue. The Titan had completed multiple dives to the Titanic before. Each dive put the carbon fiber hull under immense cyclical stress. The pressure would squeeze the hull on the way down and then release on the way up. Unlike titanium, which can handle this flexing for thousands of cycles, carbon fiber was not well studied for this kind of repeated deep-sea pressure. It's possible that with each dive, microscopic damage was accumulating within the layers of the hull. This damage would have been invisible to the naked eye, a slow degradation of the material's integrity. This process is known as delamination. The bonds between the layers of carbon fiber start to peel apart, creating tiny internal gaps. With each pressure cycle, these gaps can grow, linking up with other weaknesses until the material can no longer withstand the load. At that point, failure is not gradual, it is sudden and explosive, or in this case, implosive. The hull would have shattered into countless tiny pieces, which is why the main body of the passenger compartment was never found. It simply disintegrated into a cloud of carbon dust and fibers scattered by the force of the event. The use of this material for a passenger vessel, without rigorous independent testing and certification, was the heart of the tragedy. Stockton Rush had been warned by many in the industry that his approach was dangerous. He believed he was a pioneer, pushing past outdated regulations. But those regulations exist for a reason. They are the collected wisdom from decades of experience and past failures. In the world of deep-sea exploration, where the margins for error are non-existent, innovation cannot come at the expense of fundamental safety. The carbon fiber hull was an experiment, and tragically, the experiment failed in the most devastating way possible. As the world reeled from the news, a disturbing picture began to emerge. This was not a tragedy that came out of nowhere. It was a disaster that had been predicted. In the days and weeks following the implosion, it became clear that numerous experts had raised serious alarms about OceanGate's operations and the safety of the Titan submersible for years. These were not just whispers. These were formal warnings from respected figures in the very small and specialized world of deep-sea engineering. The warnings were consistent, specific, and ultimately ignored. In 2018, the Marine Technology Society, a leading group of ocean engineers and scientists, wrote a letter to Stockton Rush. It was signed by over 36 industry leaders. They expressed their unanimous and, unmitigated concern about the experimental approach of OceanGate. They warned that foregoing the standard independent third-party certification process could lead to negative outcomes from minor to catastrophic that would have serious consequences. They urged Rush to have the Titan tested and classed by a professional agency. The letter was a direct and powerful plea from his peers to change course. That same year, OceanGate's own Director of Marine Operations, David Lockridge, wrote a scathing report on the submersible's safety. He identified numerous critical issues, most importantly the lack of proper testing on the carbon fiber hull. He insisted that the hull needed to be subjected to non-destructive testing like ultrasonic scans to ensure it was free of flaws. When he raised these concerns, he was not praised, he was fired. His warnings were dismissed, and the company continued on its path, confident in its own assessment of the risks involved. These revelations painted a grim picture of a company culture that prioritized innovation and disruption over established safety protocols. Stockton Rush, by all accounts, was a charismatic and persuasive visionary, but one who seemed to have a blind spot for the risks he was taking. He famously complained that safety regulations were a brake on progress. This disaster serves as a brutal and tragic counterpoint to that view. In the hostile environment of the deep ocean, safety rules are not an obstacle to be overcome. They are the very things that keep you alive, written in the lessons of past tragedies. The loss of the Titan and its 5 occupants was a profound human tragedy that resonated far beyond the world of deep-sea exploration. It was a story that, for 5 days, held the world in a state of suspended animation, a collective vigil fueled by a ticking clock. The ultimate confirmation of the implosion brought that vigil to an abrupt and heartbreaking end. The families of Stockton Rush, Paul-Henri Nargeolet, Hamish Harding, and Shahzada and Suleiman Dawood were left to grieve not just the loss of their loved ones, but to do so under the intense and unrelenting glare of the global media spotlight. Their personal sorrow became a public spectacle, a final, cruel twist in an already devastating narrative. The public reaction to the disaster was complex and deeply divided, a mirror reflecting our modern society. Initially, there was an outpouring of sympathy and a shared sense of hope for a miraculous rescue. People were united in their concern. However, once the grim reality was known and the details of the submersible's experimental nature and the high cost of the tickets came to light, the mood began to shift. A wave of criticism and even dark humor emerged online. The incident sparked fierce debates about wealth, inequality, risk, and responsibility. It became a cultural moment, a flashpoint for conversations about the perceived follies of the super-rich pursuing extreme and dangerous hobbies. This shift in public sentiment was telling. It highlighted a growing disconnect in a world where some can afford to spend $250,000 on an adventure, while others struggle with basic necessities. The story of the Titan for many became less about exploration and more about hubris. The narrative of brave adventurers was replaced by one of reckless billionaires. This complex public response, from heartfelt sympathy to biting satire, showed how a single event can be interpreted in vastly different ways, depending on one's own perspective and place in the world. The tragedy was not just a news story, it became a Rorschach test for societal values. Ultimately, the echoes of this tragedy are a powerful reminder of the human cost of ambition when it is untethered from caution. 5 people, each with their own dreams, passions and families, were lost. Their story serves as a somber lesson, a modern-day fable about the dangers of dismissing expert warnings and placing blind faith in untested innovation. It's a story about the immense power of the natural world and the fatal consequences of underestimating it. The names of the 5 men who perished aboard the Titan are now inextricably linked to the legend of the Titanic itself, another chapter in the ocean's long and unforgiving history. The Titan disaster sent a seismic shockwave through the small, close-knit community of deep-sea exploration. For decades, this industry has operated with an almost perfect safety record, built on a foundation of meticulous engineering, rigorous testing, and a culture of extreme caution. The loss of the Titan was a jarring anomaly, a catastrophic failure that has forced a period of intense soul-searching and reflection. Companies that build and operate submersibles are now facing renewed scrutiny from regulators, insurers, and the public. The days of operating in a relatively obscure, self-policed corner of the maritime world are likely over. The central issue brought to the forefront is that of certification and regulation. OceanGate's decision to operate outside of the established classification system, which involves independent agencies like the American Bureau of Shipping or Lloyd's Register vetting a vessel's design and construction, proved to be its fatal flaw. This disaster has made it painfully clear why such oversight is not a barrier to innovation, but a critical safeguard. In the wake of the implosion, there are now loud calls for mandatory international regulations for all passenger-carrying submersibles, regardless of where they are flagged or in which waters they operate. The industry knows that to regain public trust, it must demonstrate an unwavering commitment to the highest possible safety standards. This event will undoubtedly lead to significant changes in how deep-sea expeditions are conducted. The move fast and break things ethos of the tech world, which Stockton Rush tried to apply to the abyss, has been proven to be catastrophically unsuited for an environment where breaking things means instantaneous death. Future expeditions will likely see more stringent safety protocols, more redundant systems, and a much more conservative approach to new technologies and materials. The use of carbon fiber for deep-diving hulls will now be subject to years of exhaustive, non-destructive testing before any reputable organization would even consider it for human-occupied vehicles. The legacy of the Titan will be a stricter, more regulated and perhaps less daring industry, at least in the short term. It serves as a brutal lesson in the difference between calculated risk, which is inherent in all exploration, and reckless gambling. The established players in the field, who have always prioritized safety above all else, will see their cautious approach vindicated. The tragic irony is that Stockton Rush's vision of opening up the deep ocean to more people may have had the opposite effect. He has made the barriers to entry higher than ever, ensuring that only those who adhere to the most rigorous and time-tested safety principles will be allowed to carry passengers into the deep. Despite the chilling lessons learned from the Titan disaster, the fundamental human desire to explore will not be extinguished. The deep ocean remains one of the last true frontiers on our planet, a vast and mysterious realm that holds untold secrets about life, geology, and the history of our world. For every tragedy, there are countless successful missions that have expanded our knowledge and pushed the boundaries of what is possible. The drive that took humanity to the highest mountains and the surface of the moon is the same drive that will continue to pull us down into the crushing darkness of the abyss. The call of the unknown is simply too powerful to ignore. However, the future of this kind of exploration will be forever shaped by the events of June 2023. The era of the cavalier privateer, operating on the fringes with experimental technology, has likely come to a decisive end. Future deep-sea tourism, if it is to continue, will be more professional, more transparent, and infinitely more cautious. It will be an activity dominated by organizations that can demonstrate an impeccable safety record and a deep respect for the unforgiving environment in which they operate. The adventurers who seek to make these journeys will be more discerning, asking tough questions about certification, testing, and safety protocols before they step inside any submersible. The disaster also raises important ethical questions about visiting underwater grave sites like the Titanic. Is it an act of historical pilgrimage and scientific inquiry, or is it a form of macabre tourism that disturbs a sacred place of rest? The loss of the Titan has added another layer of tragedy to the site, intertwining a modern disaster with a historical one. This will undoubtedly fuel the ongoing debate about how we should treat such sites. Should they be left untouched, preserved as underwater memorials, or should we continue to visit them, accepting the inherent risks for the knowledge and connection they provide? There are no easy answers to this question. Ultimately, the story of the Titan is a cautionary tale that will be told for generations. It is a story of ambition, innovation, and tragic miscalculation. It reminds us that for all our technological prowess, we are still remarkably fragile in the face of nature's immense power. The ocean will continue to guard its secrets fiercely, but humanity will continue to knock on the door, driven by that unquenchable curiosity. The future of exploration lies not in abandoning the quest, but in pursuing it with greater wisdom, humility, and a profound respect for the dangers that lie waiting in the deep, silent dark.